Hey, Julie, how's it
Hello,
going?
hello. How are you doing?
I'm
Thanks
doing
for
well.
thanks for doing this. I super appreciate it. I'm
Well,
in a hotel, so it's not the most scenic thing. It's a lot of fluorescent lighting, but yeah, I'm glad to make this work. Thank you so much.
oh, of course. I love fluorescent lights. I can't even pronounce the word. That's how excited I am.
I'm in a town called Wrightwood, California.
Okay.
It's in the mountains, kind of on the way to Big Bear. A friend has a B&B up here that she also does shows at. I'm kind of moving from between Palm Springs into LA, and then some more travel last week, or next week, and then Tribeca coming up at the end of it. So
Wow.
yeah, just bouncing around, following the comedy.
Wow. Is Tribeca the best place you're about to head to, or are you happy with this California life right now?
Oh, well, the thing about Tribeca that's going to be particularly interesting for me is I've lived in New York 3 different times. This is the second time I've been more out of LA. And the first time I lived in New York, when I moved there immediately after graduating college, looking on Craigslist for work,
Yeah.
as we do when we're starting out.
Yeah.
And there was a post for the Tribeca Film Festival, which was sponsored by American Express. And American Express had information booths all around the city. And to get people to come up to the information booths, they gave out free popcorn. And I had worked in a movie theater all through college, and I could sling some popcorn.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I worked technically at Tribeca slinging popcorn for about 4 years, 2003 to six. And now I'm coming back. What is the math on that? 22 years ish
Wow.
later to have a film there. I'll definitely get some popcorn at some point as well.
Are you gonna be walking around like look at all the booths with the popcorn going,
Yeah,
that's not how you do it. That's not how you
yeah.
do it.
More coconut oil, less seasoning salt. That's the
Yes.
that's the key. That's the recipe.
Mm. I could, I just bought this butter flavored coconut oil that is fantastic, but I've been using it for I don't know, let's say a month, and then I saw the new Mission Impossible last week, and it was just loads different. I'm just like me. Yes, I have the salt, I have the butter, but I'm not doing it right. Whatever they're doing at AMC, they're doing it much better.
And super unhealthy. It's tremendously horrible for you. But it's part of the experience.
Yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
experience. I want to spend $11. It was a Tuesday, $11 to see my movie, and I want to use that $5 rewards I have. I want to eat as disgustingly as possible. Also, I saw The Whale in theaters with it was like me and like five other people in that theater, and I bike there. I'm very lucky to live in Atlanta, to live in a place where I can just bike to the theater. And I brought in a salad in my book bag. And so I'm watching this guy masturbate and eat meatball sandwiches as I'm eating, just like this kale salad. I never felt sicker.
So if he was eating the meatball sandwich while masturbating, you were eating a salad, and what's the correlation for that? Well,
Uh,
you were,
well, masticating is chewing, so maybe
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, congratulations on this doc. I mean, it's I don't know what the kind of work goes into making something like this, but man, it's got to be a good feeling to come out with a big project after what's 2025 and you started in 2021 or probably even before that and to
Yeah.
push it out. Like how is that feeling? What was the process to get it like this?
Yeah, definitely. Ultimately, 5 years labor of love.
Hmm.
When you add it all up, four of that was production. I mean, basically, I've always been a giant Marc Maron fan. He's very singular in his perspective and, just fascinating to watch. He's very watchable. And the fact that he writes on stage, mostly, he'll have notes of topics, but he's very id in
Hmm.
the way he's, just channeling things from his head and his heart and his gut. And I had written about him 5 different times before for like Village Voice, Vulture, GQ recently, the LA Times again. Um, and he had also been in my 2021 film Too Soon,
Mhm.
Comedy After 9/11. He will also be in the new Mitch Hedberg documentary
Oh.
that'll come out next year. He's also done that too. Um, but basically, to actually answer your question, 2020, we're all on the internet a lot,
Mhm.
and we're watching content. I was glued to Maron's Instagram live that he started right from the beginning, and Lynn was living with him at that time, and they're bracing for what's going to lie ahead for the next couple of years. And 2 months in, she passes away
Yeah.
unexpectedly. Didn't even know what it was until later. It's an undiagnosed form of leukemia. And his podcast, Remembering Her, a few days after she passed, and then the Instagram lives he kept doing were so not only sad, obviously, but just beautiful, and just this real time of him processing grief with the only people who could be around, which were people online.
Yeah.
You know, couldn't connect with anybody in that time. And he started doing, it was up to at one point like 6 hours a day he was doing, 3 hours in the morning and three in the afternoon.
Wow.
And I just kept watching all of these, and I was like, someone needs to document this. This is a really fascinating time, not only, to see how he's going to deal with this. And I knew he would eventually go back on stage and turn it into some of the best material he'd ever done, even though at that time he was threatening to quit comedy forever. I
Mhm.
knew. And yeah, I basically kind of developed it up, went through all his books again, made the massive, timeline of his life, went through all the Instagrams again, the podcasts, kind of figured out, what would threads for this be, the intersections, the back and forth, combining present moment with the story of his life of how he kind of got there and
Yeah.
finally found happiness and peace with Lynn after so long of chaos in his life. And I kind of talked to a couple different people about making it. Again, this is pandemic, so you can't really immediately jump into stuff. But eventually, I spoke to Stephen Fine Arts, who's known for directing comedy specials, and he'd also made the Bitter Buddha documentary about Eddie Pepitone, which Maron was in, and they had kind of a prickly relationship because of them. I know it's shocking for anyone to have a prickly relationship with Marc Maron, but it's true. And we together pitched him over Zoom
Mhm.
2 different times, a couple months apart in late 2020. He was very non-committal, understandably. And then the following year, May 21, when venues started reopening, he was still saying he was going to quit comedy. But the comedy store opened up, basically his home club in LA.
Mhm.
And people were going on for a week. And then he said on social media he was jealous and he was going back. He was on Friday night, I'm going to go back. So I told Stephen Fine Arts to show up with a camera, and we go in the store and basically said, "Hey, we're going to film you now. This is going to happen. So we're just going to follow you." Maron's a guy who understands, how to put himself, again, like put himself out there in very vulnerable, no holds barred
Mhm.
ways. And that was basically just the process of kind of following him around, fly on the wall, verite through all these different cities, putting an act together, and just seeing, basically how, my favorite part of comedy is turning tragedy into something that can be laughed at.
Right.
The darker, it's my favorite part of comedy, of like the healing aspect. And that's basically what this documentary is about, growth, change, grief, moving on. The question is, Lynn pretty objectively made him a better person.
Hmm.
Was he going to be able to retain that? Or was he going to go back to the old Marin? And I think in a lot of ways, you get the answer by the end of that film, especially with the way he reacts with his dad, who's basically been, for the most part, the villain of his life.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that process, a window in time of here's an example of how a brilliant artist turns tragedy into comedy. And that's something we all deal with, but I think this is a very visceral way of showing it as well. And obviously like the impact of the pandemic that we're all still kind of dealing with.
Hmm.
Uh, and he's still threatening to quit, and he's still threatening to move to Canada. And obviously today he just announced that the podcast is ending. Uh, so it's going to kind of wind down at the time when the film comes out, which is again, it's Marin. It's his id. No one's going to tell him what to do. If he's done with it, got to respect it and see what's next.
Yeah, the ending of the podcast was such a surprise because it's been around since 2009. It's arguably, I would say, I know he acted before that and he put out two or three specials, including an HBO like half hour prior to the podcast. But the idea that this audio format just catapulted him to fame in 2009 and then especially in 2015 with talking to Obama and then also the Robin Williams episode and the Todd Glass episode. I like those are pieces of not just podcasting but media that are going to be forever ingrained into comedy people and regular people's minds, especially with the Robin Williams episode being a part of the being preserved thanks to the Library of Congress. It's fascinating to me that I feel like him threatening to quit and then you thinking, yeah, that's, it might happen, might not happen, it could, but right now it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I think the podcast was a big part of him, and he says that he and Brendan are just tired. They're tired of doing this. They've been doing this for, every twice a week for the past 16 years. I think
Wow.
this is a good compromise for him not leaving comedy and staying in this world of I'm going to make things, whether they be books or stand-up specials or go out and tour or acting. I think there's a great compromise to that because there's 70 million podcasts. So why not just like go out on top? He can come back anytime he wants with anything he wants because people will come back and listen. But this is a good way to for him to just end it, and find something new that really drives him.
Yeah, and on his terms completely. That's how he always works best. That Todd Glass episode, whenever anybody asks me what my favorite episode is, it's always that one. Just so beautiful,
Yeah.
and just so telling of like, what it meant to be on Marin's podcast and the trust that Todd Glass had in him and kind of coming out on this
Yeah.
show. It just, it really showed you kind of how deep podcasts can get and personal and how compelling they can be in a lot of ways, even though it's just listening to people's voices. You're not even seeing them on stage, which I always prefer live comedy, anything recorded anyway. But yeah, just the idea of like what he kind of, begat in the podcast realm. And like you said, the Library of Congress and all that stuff. He kind of sees himself as not being as successful as he might have hoped to be.
Mm.
But when you really kind of lay it all out, it's like this has been a guy who's really like done it on his own terms and never given up. Maybe had some attitude adjustments along the way, but that's also part of why we love him.
Yeah.
He's such a paradox of a comedian to like, just this is me, and what's off stage is what's on stage is
Mhm.
with on the podcast. It's all Marin. Yeah, so I'm curious to see what he's going to do next for sure. He has said he's never going to write a book again, but again, Who knows? He's
Look,
we'll
he had a popular. I always think back to this, and something you said earlier just reminded me of that. Like the him with losing Lynn, you mentioned that you were concerned that maybe this would send him back into a mental state that was that pre, 2013 era when he was just like an angry guy, angry type person. And that makes me think back, I think in the last season or the second to last season of his show on IFC, where that character of Marin, famously sober Marin, went back to
yeah.
drinking. Was it doing drugs or drinking, but something like that. He went back to it, and it changed up that final season or the final couple of episodes, and that makes me really think of that. So yeah, you're right. I wonder how this is going to affect him. I think didn't he start? Did he start dating Lynn during Glow while he was making Glow or after Glow, something like that?
Yeah, it was kind of around that time. They'd always been like really good friends ever since she was on the podcast, which is
Okay.
how they basically initially met. And he says in the doc, it was kind of murky for a long time, and they both, knew they were drawn to each other, but there was other life complications. And Lynn, he says that Lynn had her mind set on him, despite the fact that he's, maybe not the best partner,
Yeah.
maybe a little grumpy, maybe a little shut down emotionally. But she saw something in it, and it really, it made him believe in himself in a way that he hadn't before.
Hmm.
She was the one who told him he could act. She was the one who told him he could play guitar a lot more, probably publicly. All of that stuff is still reverberating today. And, I think he definitely does. He's got a new girlfriend now, Kit, but of course, it's been 5 years at this point.
Yeah.
But he's still very much, it's visible, it's very provable. She's still, Lynn is still part of his life on a lot of levels.
Yeah. You know what? I've read a lot of your pieces before, even prior to this interview. Not even to get ready for this. Just I've known it. I've known it, and the only reason I put it together today is because you go on LA Times or whatever website, and you just start reading something because it's about a topic that you like. And I'm currently in the middle of reading Lorne by Susan Morrison,
Oh yeah.
and there's something that you and she are able to do that I don't do because I'm not a good writer and documentarian. But there's something that you guys do that you're able to paint enough of a picture for you in a short format. I have not read your book, the 2 decades of comedy journalism, but I can only assume that it is expanded out upon. Your writings are expanded out upon. But I can't take what you do when you write about like James Adomian and put it into a 1,000 or 1,200 word feature, and what Susan has done and put it in a chapter of a book, and really extrapolate what is meant to define who a person is at that point in time. How do you approach that, especially when you're making a documentary or writing an article or doing something like that? Because my mind just can't wrap around it because I would put in too much extraneous information, whereas you and Susan and other great writers and documentarians are able to just kind of put everything point blank and not really bloat it up.
Well, thank you for that. That's amazing to hear. Especially as journalism's kind of dead at the moment. But that's a whole other podcast altogether. Um, and shameless plug, I do have a next summer book with Byron Bowers coming out. Byron Bowers memoir from
Oh,
Atlanta area.
okay.
Uh, I've just always been fascinated. I've always understood very well why I've been drawn to comedy. Again, that the dark side of it is just very appealing to me. Um, I grew up on a farm in Missouri, didn't have cable, didn't really know what comedy was until I was a senior at Mizzou, and Dave Attell came and did a show. And I was already in the journalism school writing about like film and music, and then I realized, oh, I'm supposed to write about comedy.
Mm.
So that was kind of the path of just realizing, like, at that time, comedy was treated as sort of a, it was just thrown in like the newspaper listings alongside of music and the calendar, and no one was writing about it in any serious artistic manner. And I realized it's less about taking material verbatim and saying, this was a funny bit, I laughed, it was good,
Yeah.
and understanding what's behind all that material. What's going on in the person's life at that time that led them to create that? Why do they need to get this out of them? Why do they need to do this in front of audience of strangers? All of that stuff was way more interesting to me. And just the fact that you can have all of these very different people, all different backgrounds, diversity, just coming into a random room any given night, all over the country, and they're all laughing at the same thing at the same time.
Mm.
And I'll sit in the back corner and watch like who's laughing at what, what and why. And I always feel like that's kind of a little bit of optimism I take with me at the end of the night. Like, all right, if we can all laugh at this thing, then that's some hope for us being able to like get along more in the real world.
Right. Yeah.
I might have been wrong on some of that because comedy's becoming much more divided than it's ever been. I'm
Yeah.
definitely going to do a project on that at some point. But it's more like what's behind the material that always kind of appealed to me. And if you can get a comic, comics love to talk about themselves.
They
If
do.
you can get them like, getting really in deep as to what drives them comedically, I just find that the most fascinating thing of all, personally.
Yeah, and you mentioning the kind of division, that's very correct. There are people who love to talk about themselves, and when they go on stage and they can get a whole group of people laughing together, then that works. But I in 2020 or 2021, I talked to Larry the Cable Guy, and I did not know I was going to be in for. Obviously, it was early 2020. It was like the pandemic started maybe like 2 months prior. But I sat down and I talked to him, and it was over the phone. And he mentioned the comedy clubs are closing down, and they had to close down, and then some were just going to have to go belly up because they just didn't have money to operate. And he was like, he said something along the lines of, just out of nowhere. Stand up. What's really gonna divide us is comedians not being able to say what they want on stage. And I'm like, dude, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about saving comedy clubs right now. And then that turned into a whole, I don't know, 5 or 6 minute discussion about Sam Kinison and things like that. And it's like, I think we are at a point where it's okay for us to have dissenting opinions and on stage and everything because that's what comedy was around for. But when you get to people like Whitney Cummings spouting just wrong things about the LA fires and people like Joe Rogan and the like, you're just kind of making the platform of comedy itself no more credible than what's on basic cable news, and that's very unfortunate at this point.
The project I'm kind of thinking of, the way I'm trying to frame it is again kind of more behind the like what leads to that again. So yeah, if your audience is going to eat something up, if you're heading in a particular direction and it's a good business move, you know, you're a professional entertainer. Do what you want. But the idea that I'm also more interested in the like psychology of how that happens with the fans.
Hmm.
Like live comedy is bigger now than it's ever been, ever. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with digital content feeding that. So then people want to see the shows. But what has really happened in all these new hardcore comedy fans' minds that, like, why do they like this comedian but not this one? And what actually has led to, like, for example, comedy influencing the last election? Like, comedy is supposed to be dumb, like, helping you take your mind off of things. But now it's electing presidents on
Yeah.
podcasts. Fascinating. What is the mentality that went there? So it's less I see about, I think, what comedians are doing, but like, why is the audience so massive for
Hmm.
this? Since it's all since pandemic, really. Like a lot changed then for comedy for sure. And we're still kind of exploring, like, I'm not sure what the end point of all this is going to be. Like comedians have always definitely been, very individualistic. That's one of the perks of being a comedian. You don't have a boss. No one can really tell you what to do. Uh, so just yeah, some of the material, kind of like you're talking about, like where does that actually come from again? That's the stuff that I just find. I definitely want to dive into that some
Yeah.
more from here. But yeah, it's fascinating that you're seeing that too, and even with like Dan Whitney back in the day, Dan Whitney, Larry the Cable Guy. Uh, yeah, it's just a fascinating time for comedy, and I'm kind of curious to see where it keeps going.
Hopefully it goes into a better direction. But I feel like it's been more diluted because of the likes of Netflix they're releasing a special seemingly every single week. Where there was that year where they did that every Tuesday for for a year.
Yeah,
But because it used to be a special used to be special. You used to go to HBO and see, oh, Chris Rock is doing a special and Greg Giraldo's doing a special and Sarah Silverman's doing a special, and that was twice or three times a year at most. And now we're just it's kind of like a proliferation of porn. You just because I can get it doesn't mean I definitely should at this point.
yeah. When I started, you knew every special that was coming out and every album. Albums were much bigger then, especially with like Comedy Central Records.
Hmm.
And it was all a big deal. There'd be a lot of lead up to everything, and they would stick around, and it'd be, the topic of conversation for a while. And yeah, there's so many, so inundated with so much material. A lot of it's, feeding the content machine for real. But like, so many people are putting their stuff up just on YouTube,
Yeah.
which then in turn, feeds to social media, which feeds to your live touring dates. But I know even, a lot of the bigger specials, I know for a fact that these artists are getting paid peanuts. I was going to say a curse word. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but
Yeah.
getting paid shit. Um, and it's just like, but you kind of just need to keep producing that material to be, if you don't have something that people can watch online, then
Hmm.
you're, not a real comedian, which is insane because it used to be you're not a real comedian if you weren't on Carson or Letterman or something
Yeah.
like that. And now it's, I need free content all the time to keep feeding the machine. Not a lot of, you can run into some not great stuff, but the fact that it is kind of more DIY now and getting rid of a lot of the gatekeepers, again, I find fascinating. So, if you have a voice and, your unique perspective, it's possible to kind of, circumvent the industry entirely. Who would have ever thought that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's mind blowing from when I started to now.
I think I like it for a lot of people because people like I'm gonna Nicole Byer. Like Nicole Byer, she's an excellent comedian, she's a great
Love,
actress.
love, yeah.
Yeah, and a wonderful podcaster. And she just put out, I think, something on her YouTube channel, which is like more crowd work from her last special, which is great. And I know she can do crowd work, but I also know she can write jokes. And there's a difference between someone like her, and then someone like Jimmy Pardo, who is just a crowd work comedian at this point, and Todd Barry, who are great crowd work comedians. And then somebody else who's getting started, some person who is doesn't write anything down, and they get up there and they're like, "Hey, remember Furbies?" and people clap, and then they do crowd work for 45 minutes. Yeah, it's there's a lot of different levels to it, and and you're right, because of the content machine that we have, it's getting much more difficult to differentiate it. But I want to ask you this. This is something I feel very strongly about, and I will not go into great detail about it. But I love a great talk show. I love a Johnny Carson, a Letterman, a Conan, even after midnight. That I like. I think that show is good for what it's supposed to be. Um, but then sometimes I'll see some shows people eat hot wings, and that's and the hosts. I'm looking at the hosts. They ask very leading questions, kind of meandering, almost like this, but they mean nothing in the end. You know, it's just like a very easy question, kind of a softball. How do you feel about that? You're somebody who's spoken to so many different comedians and like just people in general. How do you feel about hosts that aren't very, or interviewers rather, not just hosts, interviewers who aren't very good? There's not really a point to it. Not that I'm saying that Sean Evans is bad, but I also think he's bad. Also, my desk is writing. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. But is that my, by the way, is that my meeting time in the corner running out, or is that yours? I
That
can't.
is mine.
Okay, got it. I was worried I was doing it on mine. I mean, again, I would have to chalk that up to like content
Mm,
again. You want to catch people quick, get the bullet points across, and then move on to the next thing. We have this flash of info and this, and our attention spans are so, divided in a million directions. I mean, I could personally talk about comedy all day long if someone will let me. And even the crowd work thing you're talking about, crowd work used to be basically kind of a skill in your arsenal to, if the crowd's getting rowdy and you need to calm them down and they're drunk and spilling drinks. I would have never imagined that there would be an entire kind of crowd work genre. What? Like, I want to know again about who you are as a comedian, what
mhm.
drives you, your thoughts, your perspectives. Crowd work's great for like, fast paced skills, keeping your attention. Uh, some of it can be different in certain ways. You can put twists on it slightly, but I don't know. I feel it's kind of just a static thing. I don't tend to watch a ton of crowd work comedians, exclusion of like Todd Barry, for example. But yeah, I don't know. That'll be another trend that's like, is crowd work comedy going to continue to be a thing? There's only so many times you can like make fun of someone's shirt or partner or something.
So dumb.
I don't. Yeah, I want to. I want the art side of it. I want to know your thoughts.
Yeah.
That's just me. Again, you know, just what I've seen in the past, 22 plus years. But again, the process is just fascinating. I'm just endlessly attracted to everything happening in comedy, and this is just another like, really? Okay, we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, Julie, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. This has been great. This has been lovely. And you're very, very well versed on obviously journalism, but comedy in general. It's a great because I don't have to kiss your butt about a special you did. Like usually when I talk to comedians, I'm like, oh, I loved your special. I watch half of it. But you have this a great documentary that is so pertinent and so prescient to what today's news was, and I'm excited to see it, and hopefully it goes over well over at Tribeca.
I'll definitely make sure you get a chance to see it for sure.
Thank you
They're
so
supposed
much.
to be sending it out, so I will correct that error. And good use of the word prescient. Thumbs up.
Well, like I said, I read books, no big deal.
Yeah.
All right, Julie. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Hope to cross paths again soon.
All right, have a good one.
You too. You too.
Bye.